Are critique groups only useful for the amateur or the just starting out writer, or are they useful for someone who's at the pinnacle of their career? And of course, there's a big range in between that. Personally, I feel like even if I become a best-selling author, I would still be doing critique groups because I feel like I get a lot out of them, and it's something like I always want to be pushing myself and challenging myself as a writer. So I can't imagine myself giving them up. But I've spoken to a lot of writers who say that they would not keep doing them forever. So anyway, so what are your thoughts on that? You can just jump in, do a free fall.
Speaking as someone who is not at the pinnacle of their writing career, definitely. I mean, I know I've heard a lot of published writers say that, the best thing they ever did was critique groups, and that they were still doing them. I don't know, I hadn't really heard too many people say that they stopped doing them, or that they would stop doing them, I think, if they got to that point, I guess.
I've heard it from a number of writers.
Wow.
I won't name names, but yeah, like I've definitely heard it.
I've heard it from I have some friends who are actually very well published, and they said, they don't have like necessarily the group that they meet with every month, but they have their trusted readers that they will send multiple drafts, or will get feedback 2 or 3 times from a person as they're going through their novels. So it's not I think the people that I know that are my friends who have other friends that are in critique groups have said that those people who are in those critique groups, unless they change up over the years, they tend to get really stale. But always having people that you can trust that will read your stuff. I don't know of any professionally published writer who is, has a decent career in the publishing world who doesn't have people that critique them. They may not meet once a month or, whatever, but they know that they have people that they can send their stuff to for critique, and they will critique for other people too.
I think my 2 cents is basically, again, not having, best-selling numbers or anything for a book. It's hard for me to say. I mean, and put yourself in that place. You have somebody, like who's a best-selling author, and you have all the demands that are put on them as far as just, the lifestyle of somebody who it has become a brand name, and it's hard to put myself in that person's shoes and say if that would work or not. I think that there are, obviously it's a trade-off, right? I think on the one hand, one of the dangers of the critique groups that I think doesn't maybe get talked about quite enough is the whole idea that you may end up with somebody, if you're particularly insecure at the beginning of your writing career, which I certainly was at the beginning of my writing career, then I would anxiously try to take on everyone's feedback. And until I really didn't have a story anymore, I would have Frankenstory. And Frankenstory was a little bit of this person's suggestion and a little bit of that person's suggestion, until really the individual voice or individual vision got lost in this collaborative effort that really, in trying to please everyone, really didn't please anyone. And so I think that's one danger there. On the other hand, you have the danger of the writer who becomes overly confident, right? And to the point where they feel like they got this, they can do this. And I've heard certainly, stories about folks who got to a certain point in their writing career to the point where they felt like they didn't need editing. Generally, the consequence of that is that the writing isn't as powerful as it could be. So I think the way I would imagine it would work, as I continue to build a career, is to have like the small group of people that you say, I need to look at this. Can you go ahead and take a look at it? And sometimes it evolves to the point where it's, these are people who are your peers as writers, where it's kind of like, can you go ahead and take a look at this? And so that's how I imagine it would work.
I know at least one best-selling writer, literally best-selling writer, and I know others who are full-time, and none of them, to my knowledge, don't get feedback. They all are part of their critique groups. They tend to be part of like some smaller sorts of critique groups. They tend to be a little more selective, but they all have somebody. And you talk about writers who feel like they don't need to be edited anymore. Well, I'm just going to mention Thomas Harris. He very literally turned in the manuscript for Hannibal and just dropped it on the publisher and said, "This is it, and you can't change a word of it." They weren't allowed to change it. Well, we've seen the results of that. A lot of people didn't like Hannibal very much. So, of course, I'm sure he sold a bazillion copies of it, but still. I think that for me, even if I were to attain, some level of bestsellerdom or even be able to write full time, I would still be getting other opinions. I would like to have at least one or two people that I trust that I could go to and have and get some sort of feedback, because really it's kind of like when you listen to your voice. It's like when you listen to your own voice, you are always shocked by the sound of it. And so you don't know your own voice, and I think that's very true of writing too. You don't quite know how successful you are unless you bounce it off a few people.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. Although it is an interesting point that Nicole brought up about critiques, or I think it was Sherry that brought it up about critique groups that get stale, or that if a writer has been in it for like 20 years or something, it's the same group. I can see how that
would make sense.
Yeah, I think it's a matter of, are you progressing?
Yeah.
Because if you're not, then your critique group's not helping you. I mean, that's the whole point of a critique group, is to help you get better at what you do. If you're not progressing, then your critique group is falling down on the job. And so, I mean, that's the thing you've got to take a look at. And then there's the thing of, if you do progress, is everyone else in the group progressing too? It is possible, I think, for a writer to progress beyond the level of their peers in that particular group and might need a new group. I mean, that's just a hard truth.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I mean, I've never been in a group, I would say, for more than like 3 or 4 years, maybe 5. I don't think I've ever been in a group that lasted longer than that. So I guess if I'm ever in one that's lasted for 10 or 20 years, I'm going to start running into these problems, yeah.
Okay. I mean, I've heard of a couple of groups, I think, of published writers that I think had kept that group for really well, but maybe they just became more friends and trusted readers after a while, where they weren't meeting regularly, but just, they trust each other's opinions, and so, hey, here's a new manuscript, tell me what you think.
Yeah,
and I think part of what we're getting at here too is the whole idea that at the beginning of a writing career, a critique group can really just provide a lot of support for an endeavor that doesn't get a lot of support in general. For example, if you tell someone that you're a writer, people, if they don't know how serious you are about it, they may assume that you're one of the, thousands of people out there who are just wide-eyed dreamers. But if you have a critique group of people, your peers who are kind of in the trenches with you, you're fighting the battles, you're all getting the rejections at the same time, maybe. There's an esprit de corps in that kind of experience that really provides the emotional support a lot of folks need. I know certainly that I needed in the early going, and I think that as time goes on, members of the group may altogether need less of that, and so there's still warm feeling, there's still friendship, there's still sharing of manuscripts. There's not this sense that you're all kind of that group of soldiers in the landing craft getting ready to storm Normandy, and you're all there together and you're hunkered together, and there's not that sense of being in common peril, I guess, that forges people to be together so closely in critique groups.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.